Hey everybody, it's Mariana with 3 Peaks Classroom. If you are new to my channel, welcome and hello. I am a grade 3 and grade 4 teacher here in Alberta, Canada, and I love to make helpful YouTube videos for other teachers just like you. In today's episode, I want to talk about all of the questions that you guys have been sending me on Instagram, all about how to approach teaching writing in your classrooms. Recently on Instagram, I did a poll or like a question box where I said, tell me all of your struggles that you have regarding teaching writing in your classrooms, and you guys did not disappoint. You have sent me tons of questions, and so many actually that I'm probably going to film this in like 3 parts because I want to make sure that I go over all of your questions and I answer them, because I know there are many of you that are struggling with the same issues in your class as well. Now, this is the 4th episode in my writing mini series where I've talked about what does teaching writing strategies in my classroom looks like what does writing look like in my classroom. In the very first episode, I talked about what are some key components that you should have in your classroom to make sure that you have a very healthy and robust writing program. In the second episode, I shared with you my favorite writing resources that I use in my classroom when I teach. And in last week's episode, I showed you what my daily schedule looks like, my weekly schedule looks like, and monthly writing assignments, what those all look like, so that you can get an idea of how much writing we do in my classroom. And I break it down by subject and how much time we spend on each activity. So those are the episodes that I've covered. And now in today's episode, I want to talk to you about some frequently asked questions or some struggles that I'm seeing in your emails and in Instagram messages. Thank you for reaching out and sharing those with me. Like I mentioned, this is part 1 because I could not get through all of the questions. I want to make sure that I give each question its due time. So we are going to jump right in. I have the questions on my laptop here. Like I mentioned, I gathered a bunch of questions on Instagram, and I'm going to start off with this question from Lindsay, who writes, how can I help all of my students with writing? Centers don't work for my current group of students. And that is a great question to start off with, because I'm sure this applies to many teachers. You've tried stations, you've tried daily 5, your kids are too chatty, they're not on task, yada, yada. I'm sure this question applies to many teachers. We need to remember why having centers or rotating through daily 5 stations is important to have. And the reason why is so that it allows you, the teacher, to have time to sit down with a small group of students for targeted, focused instruction. If your group cannot handle rotating through centers, here are a few things that you could try instead. Do you have to do centers? Could your entire class be working on the same project or the same writing assignment while you pull 5 or 6 kids to work in a small group setting? Something that I do in my class is I have experts that walk around. So while we are working on a whole group writing task, anyone that finishes early, I just had a bird fly up onto my windowsill. Anyone that finishes early, they get a little expert badge here. They show me they work. I say, yep, you're all finished, ready to go. They then become experts and they are free to roam around and walk and answer any questions that students might have. Or if a student might be struggling with spelling something or whatever, the experts can walk around and take a look at the kids' writing. And that frees up time for me then to meet with 3 or 4 kids in a small group setting. There's also nothing wrong with a whole class setting instruction if everyone is benefiting. And my hunch is that you probably have a super, super large class size that makes running stations really, really difficult. And I hear you. If that's the case, I hear you 100%. I personally would dial it back, and just start with 2 stations. Just start with that. Half of the class is doing this activity, maybe that's a writing activity, and the other class is playing a word game. So, you've got 15 students here, 15 students here, whatever. And you're going to do 10-minute stations. So this one and this one, that's it, just 2 stations. And while the kids are in the station, you're going to pull 5, 6 kids and you're going to do a small group activity. And then once the timer's done, they're going to switch. And then you pull a different set of 5 kids to really hit home and target that practice. So Lindsay, I hope I answered your question. If you do have a large class size or if managing the kids while you're running stations is difficult, then just dial it back. When I run my stations, when I do daily 5, I only start with 2 stations. I basically just start with 2 stations and then we switch, that's it. And we work our way up into all 5 stations. And even then requires a lot of practice. But once the kids get the hang of it, once you've managed it, once I've roamed around and the kids know the expectations, that's when I begin my guided writing or my guided reading series. The bird is still right here. I love it. It's actually quite distracting. The next question that I have is from Winnie. And Winnie writes that they do journal writing in their class, but a few kids just sit there and do nothing. Tips for encouragement. And yes, unfortunately, this happens in every grade and every class. There's always going to be a few kiddos that just refuse to write. But once you figure out why they're not writing, then it's a lot easier to figure out how to motivate them to write. And their lack of writing could be a few reasons. And I kind of jotted some notes down. Do they have a fine motor difficulty holding a pencil? I know that's something that maybe we don't think about, but coming from an early learning background, that's the first thing we check for. Literally, when kids come into the classroom, can they hold a pencil? And in grade 3 and 4, it kind of is hard to notice because up until this point, the students may have figured out a way to hide the fact that they are inefficient in printing. And so do they have difficulties? I had a student one time who refused to hold a pencil and had like a bunch of gel pens with them and markers. And as soon as they used that, it was like a game changer. They didn't have any issues writing because it was a lot more fluid. It required less core strength to hold and press a pencil down than it was to use like a gel pen. So just keep that in mind. Could they use a gel pen? Could they use a marker? Could they use a pen? Maybe they have an undiagnosed learning disability. I actually have a member in my family that was recently diagnosed with dysgraphia. And it was because the parents were noticing that he was struggling a lot with his homework. And although they worked with him every night, multiple nights, and they still do, they even spoke to the teacher about it. And the teacher said, no, he's not, I wouldn't worry about it. He's not that severe. He just might be a little slower than the other kids. So he kind of flew under the radar, but the parents were so determined to figure out there's got to be something happening here. So they actually went the private route and they had him assessed. And turns out he has dysgraphia. And once they figured that out, then now we have the tools to help him. So he has special paper that he writes with. He has, special writing tools and things, and he's able to type on the laptop. So is there a learning disability maybe that went flying under the radar? Something to think about. I also had a student in my class that was diagnosed ODD, so oppositional defiant disorder, and he absolutely refused to write anything on paper. Just would throw the pencil. Literally, he actually had a really bad habit of breaking all of his pencils that would prevent him from writing. So it took a long time for him to write anything down. So instead, I taught him how to use speech to text on his laptop. And yes, it was still painful. He still, refused and was defiant to do it. And it began with like 1 or 2 word responses, journal responses, but eventually over the year, it took a year, worked up to being a sentence, 2 sentences. And then he would email it to me. It wasn't a huge document, sure, but it was something. It was something that he was doing and contributing. And that is the point that I want to make about journaling. It's not necessarily that the kids are writing. I know I've stressed that. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. And yes, there is some merit to that. But journaling, in my classroom at least, journaling is about getting the kids to get their ideas on paper without worries of structure. They have so many ideas that are in their head, but a lot of times they get blocked because they're worried about, capitals and spelling and punctuation, and I have to have this and that. Journal writing is a chance to just let it all out and free write. How can they share their ideas best? Printing works for most kids. It's usually not an issue for like 75% of kids. But maybe others need a device. Maybe others need like a personal dictionary because maybe they get so blocked about spelling things incorrectly that maybe they just need that personal dictionary. Maybe they need a special fancy pen or something like that. Think about what the point of the journaling is. Now, Melly asked a very similar question to Winnie, and her question is, how do you get kids to write when they are unmotivated? Lots of avoidance and excuses. So if you've ruled out learning delays, if you've ruled out fine motor diagnoses and things like that, and it's literally just a lack of motivation, here are a few things that I have tried in my classroom that have worked. Give them a choice board. So those of you that are my email subscribers, you have seen that I've sent out a September and October choice board for journal writing. And basically they're allowed to pick from the entire page of journal prompts. They're allowed to pick whatever they want to write about. So give them a choice board, however you want to structure that. I know I've seen like bingo pages where kids have to choose one from this column, or whatever, and it has to like line up somehow. Give them choice in their writing. That's the first thing I would try. Number 2, comic strips. Do not underestimate the power of using comic strips in writing. Honestly, as soon as you tell them to write a comic strip, it's like, done. I can do that. So, something I like to do on Mondays is tell me about your weekend. That's usually like a journal prompt that I have. And yeah, I can get them to write about their weekends in a comic strip format. Try that. Sometimes also, if writing is really hard, I ask the kids to draw a picture. I let them know you are totally welcome to draw a picture, but then after you draw the picture, I want you to write 1, 2, 3 sentences that's related to your picture, that's related to the journal prompt. Convince me style journal prompts are always so much fun for the kids to write. Convince me why we should have 3 extra recesses. Convince me why I should take you guys to the gym for an extra phys ed period. Convince me why we should have a movie day on Friday. Those are so much fun for the kids to write because they think they're true. So convince me style journal prompts are really fun. And then, like I mentioned before, take away any sort of pressures in terms of capitalizing, spelling, punctuation, all of that. A lot of times students are avoiding it because they're worried about getting it wrong. And just take away any of that and just have them write. I'll take this a step further. In my class, I like to collect the journals on Fridays and I like to reply to the kids. And if I notice that they're not writing, this is a fantastic opportunity for me to check in with them and say, hey, I took these journals home. I wanted to read what you had to write. I was genuinely curious about, who's in your family or the best holiday you've ever been on. But I was really disappointed that I didn't get to read anything from you. So make sure that let's try writing it next week. And I'd love to reply to you. That has almost always worked to motivate my students with their writing, and seeing a response from me in the journal or like a sticker or something is also very highly motivating. So those are just some tips from my personal experience. A few more questions and then we'll end this episode, and then I'll resume all the questions in another episode. Melly also asks how to get students to write more than 1 sentence before quitting. And like I mentioned, it kind of goes with the question that I've been answering above in terms of like motivating and encouraging them in different ways. Comic strips, use pictures, try a different style of writing, worry less about formalities. Is there a reciprocal relationship in terms of the communication, in terms of the journals? So those are all different ways, but also it just takes time and practice. How do we get kids to do anything in the class? I mean, it just takes repetition and practice. So, while they're doing their journal writing, you're walking around, you're making sure that they're writing more than a sentence, and you're saying, Kate, I want to know a little bit more from you. All right, second last question belongs to Katrina. And Katrina asks for tips for beginning teachers. She wonders what writing should look like, how to assess where the kids are. So a sneaky way that I quickly assess where students are with their writing is literally on day 1, on the very first day of school. I ask them 4 questions. What is their favorite subject? What are they great at? What do they need help with? And why is school important? So I put it on my whiteboard or some chart paper, and then I give them 4 Post-it notes, or they can use their own different colors if they want. And I get them to reply to the questions, but make sure that they put their name on the back so that when they go and put the Post-it note up on the board, people can see their answers, but they don't know technically who wrote it. And then at the end of the day, I go and collect all those responses, and I can generally see from those responses on day 1 who is at grade level, who's below grade level, and who's above grade level typically for writing. And just keep in mind, like for grades 3 and 4, they should be able to write in complete sentences. And by the end of grade 3 and by the end of grade 4 for surely, they should be writing in basic paragraph structures. That activity also teaches me a little bit about each of my students after the very first day of school. So I'm sitting there and I'm assessing their writing, seeing how they're at, but I also get to learn a little bit about my students as well. Also to mention, in grades 3 and 4, there should still be a big focus on proper technique. Are you starting at the red margin? Are you starting your sentences with a capital? Do you have appropriate spacing between your words? Do your sentences end with a punctuation? When you finish at the line, do you sweep to the left again and begin at the margin? Those are all very tedious things that we have to make sure that we're practicing. But this is where the groundwork is laid so that in grades 5 and 6 and beyond, they are able to write the long answer. All right, last question. And I saved this one on purpose for the end because it is a bit of a trickier question. Lindsay asks, how do I strongly guide my EA to do what I need to do without sounding bitchy? And I hear you. I actually typed up a response because this is very personal to me. So I haven't talked about this much on this channel, and maybe one day I will have the courage to talk about it because it still affects me. But in my very first year of teaching, I did have a very traumatic event with the EA that was in my class. And looking back on it now, it's the first and only time that I recognized that I had a panic attack while I was teaching, and it was because of this experience. So yes, working with support staff can have a range. It can range from incredibly amazing, which I'm so thankful I've had way more experiences with incredibly amazing support staff, and it can go down all the way to not so great, to put it mildly. This is what I'll say. Working with support staff first and foremost begins with making sure that they feel seen, heard, validated. They have their own opinions and their observations as well, and those matter. At the end of the day, the students are your sole own responsibility. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Your EA is there to support the class learning. Let's just say you have a class of students that are let's say you have a group of students that are working way below grade level in their writing, and you want the EA to meet up with them every day while you teach the whole class. I would approach it by saying these words. It's so great that we have 2 teachers in the class to help support these kids. While I'm teaching the rest of the class, I would love it if you could pull these 3 kiddos and work with them at this table with this activity. They would really benefit from targeted instruction that you can provide them, and then we'll be able to see them progress. So I try to approach every conversation with that in mind. We always want to talk about keeping what's best for the students in our minds. We want to be able to see them progress. And again, I will reiterate, it's really important that they feel like they have been seen, heard, validated, and included as well. Also, I would ask them, do they have a suggestion for an activity based on their observations from what they're seeing in the class? Do they have something that they can suggest? And if so, try it out. Did it work? Was it great? Was it successful? If they don't have a suggestion, that's okay. Thank you for your observations. I'm going to write that down. I really appreciate that. Here's an activity that I think would really benefit. Let me know how it goes, and then we can discuss from there. So yeah, that's just generally my response and how I would handle things in the classroom. I definitely want to make sure that anybody that's in my classroom, anyone that walks in, feels validated, feels heard, feels seen, because that's all what it's about, right? So that's how I would approach every single conversation. And at the top of the mind is always, what can we do to best support the students that are in our class together, based on your observations, based on my observations, based on what I need to teach them and your expertise. What can we do to help support these kids? That's how I would frame that. But I would love to hear from you guys as well, actually. Have you worked with an EA in your classroom before? What was your experience like? You can leave me a comment in the comment section below. And maybe one day I'll pucker up the courage to talk about some of the experiences that I've had working with EAs. Thank you all for being here. Like I mentioned, that's going to be part 1 of the writing question series because there are so many amazing questions and I want to make sure that I hit them all. So thank you all for being here. Next week, I'm going to pause the writing series and I want to do a fun little Halloween episode where I'm going to talk about some fun Halloween activities that you can do in your classroom. And then after that, I will resume the remaining episodes for this series. Thank you so much, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.